So today what we'll be doing is a colored pencil drawing of some lovely cat eyes. So with that, I already have one of them started, just kind of as an example of how to layer your colors. And then we're going to be working with this side of the eye. So it's kind of up to you. Sometimes it's interesting just to focus on one eye and have that be kind of your main picture, or having the whole entire face of the cat. So some of the colors I would recommend using, and if you don't have these exact colors, that's fine. I mean, there's lots of colors that will apply in just the same way. So I have a sienna brown, which is about the same as like burnt sienna or terracotta. I have a canary yellow, but any kind of light warm yellow works just as good. True blue, which, you know, just having a nice medium blue is great. Indigo blue, pink rose, true green, blue slate, which could just be a light blue, mulberry, which is just a purple. We'll need a purple for some of the highlights and kind of the tear duct of the eye. And then this is just a different purple. You don't necessarily have to have two purples, but this is another option. And then we have black and white. So depending what color paper you're doing this on will kind of depend on kind of the process you're doing with this. So I'm drawing mine onto toned gray paper, which is really great for pastels and colored pencils, just because, you know, instead of having to, you know, leave room for the whites with the white paper, instead I can actually put those in, and it kind of adds another level of contrast. So you can get the same effect with black paper or toned paper that's any other color besides white. If you're doing this on white paper, instead of drawing it on with like a white pencil, instead I would recommend drawing it on with just a regular pencil, very lightly. So when you're first starting your drawing of the eye, you want to make sure that you're looking at kind of the overall shape. So I started off by drawing kind of a basic circle, and then started kind of tilting and looking at kind of the angle of the eyelids, and kind of went from there. So to start on the coloring aspect of your eye, first you really want to look at your main highlights and kind of the lightest colors in your picture. So my main highlights are kind of these funny little squares. And so I'm very lightly going to put those in, because that's another way you can get a nice sense of depth with your drawings, is not pushing too hard too soon and kind of working up to those darker layers. And then I see there's a little bit of light down here. And when I'm using this, I'm using the side of the pencil. Not really using the point very much. The point is really good for kind of small areas. Okay, so I'm not pushing very hard. This is just barely a hint of it, because if you push too hard with the white, it's going to make all of your other colors that you put on top of it look really chalky. So it's good to kind of slowly work up to it. So that's a good kind of start with the white, and then I would start coming in with my yellow, because if you look at the eye, there's, you know, these nice pretty greens in this area. So to kind of help those greens really pop, I like to do a really light layer of yellow around the iris, which the iris is kind of the darkest part of your eye. I mean the pupil, not the iris. The iris is going to be the colored part of the eye, and then the pupil is this part. So I'm putting a little bit around the pupil, not the iris. So putting a little bit of yellow, not too much yellow. And then I'm going to take my light blue, and when I'm filling in my eye, I don't want to just blindly go, you know, up and down like I would fill in a square. I want to try and kind of use the side and curve my pencil as I'm going. You know, and sometimes I'll have to do kind of crisscross lines, but overall I'm trying to curve in the direction of the eye, and that'll really help kind of emphasize that roundness that the eye has. So, and then I'll start coming in with my darker blue, which, you know, it's a really dark, it's kind of a medium blue. And I'm just kind of darkening some of the edges And in order to kind of blend this, I don't want to leave it just as like an outline. So you want to make sure you're pushing hard where you want it dark and kind of letting off the pressure. And that'll help for this to blend into the rest of the eye. So colored pencil is all about going slow, working up to your layers. You know, it might look like a hot mess for a little bit where it's like, what is going on? And there's so many lines, but over time it'll get better and better. So, and if you get a lot of scratchy lines, like right now I have a lot of lines going in different directions. A lot of times if you kind of curve some lines going in the direction you want them to on top of those and kind of go back and forth, it'll make it seem a little bit more smooth. And also I can come back over it with some of my lighter blue. And that helps to blend it as well. So then I would start coming in with maybe some of my greens. And with my greens, I'm kind of going side to side to try and kind of replicate, you know, the direction that these lines are going in. And then I'm going to put a little bit of blue in between my pupil and those greens. So, and this is just a very faint idea of what your colors need to look like. Obviously with colored pencil it just takes lots of layers. And then I can start coming in with my white, you know, to kind of put some of these little highlights in. A lot of times with highlights you can make them by just leaving some of the paper showing or very lightly going over it with some white. And white's also good to kind of blend some areas. But you have to be careful because if you use it too much instead of blending, it just makes everything lighter. And, you know, if you have a shadow and you're trying to blend it, you might not want that there. And I could also put a little highlight very lightly over here because there is a little bit of a highlight around the pupil. And this is just kind of a good base right now. So now what I can do is start coming in with some of my black. And I normally start by kind of redrawing a little bit what I'm trying to fill in, because you don't want to just blindly fill something in and it ended up you were following the wrong line or it was too big. So, and the more and more layers I do on this, the darker and the more realistic it's going to be. So, and if I go outside of the lines, that's okay, just embrace it, you know. Every eye is different. And then if I wanted to kind of blend the edges of my pupil a little bit, I can just use some of the white. And I'm going to press a little harder where those highlights are. And then if I was filling in my shadow, I could start, rather than with the black, I might start with the indigo, just because indigo is kind of a really nice dark blue. So it's kind of a good in-between of doing black and your blue. So I'm going to start putting that in very lightly, which I already drew a little line to kind of indicate where my shadow needs to go. And notice how I'm kind of curving my pencil to go in that direction. And then down here, since it starts changing color, I'm just going to kind of fade it a little bit so it's not too dark. Because later on we're going to be putting some purple down here, so I don't want this color to kind of overtake that purple. I have to turn this a little bit so my hand can get to the drawing. And I can also kind of put some blue on top of that black. Or if I have some areas that aren't blended very well, that's also where I can kind of come in, add some more blue on top, make it a little bit more blended. And then if you wanted to start on the tear ducts, which, you know, are kind of like these little purpley areas down there, what I would do first is, rather than starting with like black, is I would very lightly start putting in some purple. And then my purple I want to leave pretty light because all these little highlights on here are really made by the purple. And then you could have left some room for this little highlight, or you can always try and kind of put it back in because it's not going to be as bright as like this highlight, but it is still, you know, fairly bright. And then after that, then I can start coming in with my black and darkening, you know, my tear duct area, kind of this little area. And then when I start getting to the purple, I want to fade lightly into the purple so it looks nice and blended rather than just being like two different sections and really sharp. Okay, so that's how I would start your colored pencil eye. And then the more layers you do on it, the better, just keeping in mind what direction your lines are going in, and then the more layers you get onto it, the more realistic it's going to look. And then you can add in some black over here, add the little squiggle that's in the picture. I didn't have any gray, so I just kind of flicked some purple fur in there. You know, you can kind of have fun with the fur. The important thing to do is try and follow the direction that the fur is going in the picture. A lot of times it'll kind of be outlining the eye and then kind of flicking out in the other direction on the bottom of the eye.